Oliver, and this is the 6th round game between Bhaskar and Adhiban with white and Shakh Mamedyarov with black. Now, I must warn you, this is a long game, so it's gonna take a while. But I'm going to try and explain the moves as I see them. It's impossible for me to understand all the subtleties that went into this game, but I will try to explain it as I see it, and hopefully you will enjoy that. So Adhiban had white. He opened with c4, the English, symmetrical English by Big Shakh Mamedyarov. d4 by white, knight f6 and knight c3. So there are two ways that black could go here. He could go with e6 or g6. e6 is slightly more common, that's what he goes with. One of the ideas there is to play bishop b4, so white plays a3 to prevent that, and now bishop c5, putting some pressure on the knight on d4. And I must admit I haven't seen this move that Adhiban played, and it looks quite interesting. Bishop e3, usually that's not a very good move because this bishop can be hit with a knight, but in this case you can't do that. You can't do that. If we have a quick look, if knight g4, I will take on c6. I'm hitting your queen, and you don't have time for knight takes e3. White comes on top in these complications. Okay, material is equal, but white is somewhat better here. He can push b4, g3, rook b8. Very good development from white. Knight can jump to e4, b5. Some weaknesses here to work around with. So this was clearly something that Bhaskar had prepared. And my guess is this must have come as somewhat of a surprise for Mamedyarov. And he thought for a good while here and took on d4. So over 22 minutes, so obviously he was surprised here. Bhaskar took on d4. And Mamedyarov decided to develop his bishop to b7. e4 by white, bishop b7, hitting the pawn. And now b4, indirectly protecting the pawn on e4, because if black takes here, that's hardly an option. Taking here, you protect the pawn, and such a structure, you need your black squared bishop, because now this d6 square is too weak. White will have very easy development. Bishop e2 castles, put everything on the d file. Yeah, it's tricky for black to play. So Mamedyarov goes back with the bishop to e7, and I'm a little bit surprised that Adhiban didn't go for e5 here. It looks like the most principled move, and not sure what black wants to do here. I mean, he has the choice of putting the knight back on g8 or to e4. In both cases, I mean, knight g8 has to lose time, and the knight on e4 could be hit with a queen g4, and that looks dangerous. There's no way that this was preparation by Mamedyarov. He clearly was surprised by bishop e3, as he thought for 20 minutes. So yeah, a curious moment why he didn't go for e5, Adhiban. Instead he went bishop d3, which is also looks fine. d6, both sides castle. So black has set up kind of a hedgehog structure. Usually in the hedgehog the pawns are here, and it's called the hedgehog because it resembles the spines of a hedgehog, and the spines will hit you if you attempt to do anything on the 5th rank. Everything on the 5th rank is hit with the spines. But here Mamedyarov hasn't played a6, and he doesn't do so actually for the whole game. Queen e2, knight d7, and well, not having played a6 gives white extra options of knight b5, but it also adds protection for black to the pawn of b6, which can also be important. So there are some trade-offs to this business. Rook c8. So just normal developing moves in hedgehog structures. The rook feels fine on the c file, the other one on the half open d file. Black plays queen c7. Quite happy to put the queen on b8. Sometimes it goes to a8 to form a battery here. On this diagonal, Adhiban goes for queen g4, a mate threat, but Mamedyarov blocks the g7 diagonal, hits the queen, and we have a repetition. And as always, Mamedyarov wants to fight, so he's not going for the draw with knight f6, he plays knight e5. Usually when people play a structure such as the hedgehog, they want to take chances, and we have to give it to Big Shakh that he always wants to fight. He wants a fight in every game. So knight g6 now. Going back, white can take on e5 here, but let's just have a quick look. I mean, you give up the bishop here, and black will hope that he can activate this bishop somehow, and these pawns, they do cover a lot of ground. So black is actually very happy with this trade-off. Adhiban did not go for that, so queen back to g3, knight g6. f3 by Adhiban. Rook to d8. Bishop f1. The bishop gets out of the way. Doesn't really have any purpose at the moment other than to protect the c4 pawn. So it's more useful to open up the d file for the rooks to pressure on the d pawn. Bishop h4, hitting the queen h6. Well, both. It can be useful to get luft, but also it can be useful to get the g5 square for the bishop. So the pawn protects the g5 square. Bishop to e3. Bishop to f6. So a lot of maneuvering. This is typical for such structures, because it's really committal for either side to make a break, and for the moment it's not happening. Knight b5 offering another repetition, but this time Mamedyarov goes with the other rook, rook c to d8, and he doesn't mind. The rook on e file could actually be useful once you push d5. This rook is well placed on the d file, and this rook could threaten the bishop on e3. a4. So finally white is getting ready for some kind of action on the queen side. Possibly a5 in the future. Bishop c6. Queen g3. Big attack on d6, which Mamedyarov solves indirectly by attacking the queen. And then rook e7. Preparing to use the rooks to protect the pawn. Now bishop d3. Some more maneuvering. I'm not going to claim that I fully understand what's going on. Bishop to f6. f4 by white. So white is starting to push out. He's starting to push on the queen side and on the king side. So creating some dynamic possibilities of pushing pawns. But with every pawn push, you leave a weakness behind, and that's what black is usually hoping for. Queen a8. Notice that f3 weakened this diagonal. So Mamedyarov immediately goes for this diagonal. Rook e1. Rook d to d7. Bishop f2. And now a committal move, typical Shakh move. He wants to do something, and he goes a5. He's not losing material, but this is highly committal, and turns out that it gives white the better chances. After bishop takes b6, Mamedyarov took on b4, and now a5. This pawn looks very dangerous. b3 by Mamedyarov, and for the moment this pawn looks kind of offside. It looks like white should be able to round it up, but he did not go for it. Not though that the pawn is coming to b2 soon. So first he plays king h1. Prophylactic move, getting off this diagonal, but there's no danger on this diagonal yet, but maybe he didn't find anything more useful than that. e5 now by Mamedyarov. This closes the diagonal of the bishop, but he wants to activate this knight, and after f5, knight comes into f4. Bishop e1, keeping an eye on e4 and also preventing the promotion. And now another Shakh move. He wants to win. He wants to open the position up. So he plays d5. Usually this pawn break is quite useful for black in the hedgehog, and when you achieve that, you very usually have at least an equal position. But here it's still very much up for grabs, and anything can still happen. So a highly committal move again. E takes d5, and this forces bishop takes on b5. Queen takes d5, and now white has these dangerous pawns. And Adhiban finds a way to protect them here indirectly with bishop to e4. And I say indirectly because now if you take on b5, there's bishop to c6. This hits both the queen and the rook. But Mamedyarov avoided that. He went with queen to d2. And now Adhiban pushed a6. Mamedyarov pushed his own pawn, rook b1. And for the moment these look more dangerous, and I must like white here, I have to admit that. Queen to b4, bishop c6, protecting the pawn, hitting the rook, which goes to d3. Here Adhiban should have gone rook e3 according to the engine. So this prevents rook a3, and we'll see in the game why that is important. In the game Adhiban played bishop e3, and after rook a3, a7. And here Mamedyarov keeps his fair chance in the game by sacrificing the exchange. He gets a pawn as well, and although white is objectively better, black has gotten rid of most of the danger connected with the passed pawns. And when you sacrifice the exchange, it's usually very important that you are operating on a complex different than your opponent. And you'll note that black is more or less operating on black squares here. He has the black squared bishop, and white has the light squared bishop. So it means that black should have his fair chance, his fair play. Fair share of the chances is what I was trying to say. Queen d1, rook a3, trying to get the rook more active. Bishop pulls back, and this gives up the pawn though. I'm wondering if there were better options here. Probably not. I mean, black is getting pretty threatening with knight d3 is already very tricky. So probably wanted to prevent knight to d3 and put bishop to e4, but this drops the pawn. Queen d2 in return. Shakh tries to hold on to the b pawn. g3. This knight doesn't have a lot of squares. It goes to h3. Bishop d2 pushes the knight, and now knight has to move again. Knight to f3. So we have this trade-off. White gets the b pawn, but with all the play on one side of the board, black should be okay here with the bishop and the pawn for the rook. The rooks aren't really threatening to do much, and black is very active. And most importantly, he has a very safe king. There are no immediate threats, and the king is safe on h7. Play continued, rook to e3, and now e4. Opening up for the bishop, and importantly holding on to the rook and taking it back with a pawn. If you take rook b8 check, king is safe on h7, king g2, and queen c6. Now here was probably where Adhiban could have and should have forced things with rook to b4. Now this attacks the e4 pawn, and if bishop c3, now we just enter a completely drawn rook endgame after these forced moves, and most likely we would have seen a handshake pretty soon if this had happened. Instead, Adhiban took on f3, and this gives black a very dangerous pawn here on the f file, and is probably what eventually swings the game over to Mamedyarov. Bishop e7, he's come to c5 with check, and from there you can push the pawn to f2, and the pawn becomes very dangerous. Queen d3, bishop c5 check, king back to f1, and bishop a7, hitting the rook and opening up opportunities for the queen to come to c5, threatening mate. The rook went back to b1, and now queen c5. King e1 was played, but probably f6 was a good option here. The thing is that in the game, let's just see what happened in the game. King e1, queen f2, king d1, and f6. If white had played f6 himself, he has more chances to threaten the black king. As it is here, you kind of need to get this queen here over to g6 to do anything. But to do that just takes too many moves. You would have to come here, here, and then finally here. And 3 moves is not time that you have in this position. But with the pawn on f6 and g6, then you only need 1 move, like queen to this diagonal, and you threaten the pawn on f7. So that's probably the difference, which might have given black better chances, white better chances to defend. But it didn't happen. He played rook to b3, hitting the pawn, but that's easily repelled. Queen g1 check. And another check. And here, okay, we can push the pawn. But if we do, f2, there's rook b1. And this square is sufficiently covered. So Mamedyarov correctly assumes that he can push the pawn whenever he wants. So why not take the pawn on g3 first? So that's what he does. h5 now. Trying to cement the grip on g6. So now even with the queen on g file, if you get the queen over to g6, well, it's not very practical, but if you do, you can take with a pawn, and there's back rank mate. Not gonna happen though. Queen e5 check, and the king starts running. I think he went this way just to try to cover some squares by the black bishop. King b5, but the fight will revolve around this pawn f2. White is covering f1 for now, like in the other variation, but black is able to run things up here nicely. He attacks the rook, queen to g2, bishop comes back, wants to come over to e1, so king tries to prevent that by covering this square, and now the bishop comes back to e3. Queen can't take because queen takes f1 comes with a check, and you're not in time for a perpetual. King a4, bishop d2, same idea, you can't take it because queen takes f1 and you're not in time. King back to b5, and now this guy is toast, stuck on f1, preventing promotion. And yeah, it's just completely winning. Let's quickly go over the moves here. King started running, and now Shakh picked up the pawn on h5, comes back, attacking the rook, queen c8, otherwise queen takes f5, bishop to b4 check now, pushing the king back, and very clever play by Mamedyarov. Now the queen goes to e2, queen c1, and now bishop e1, and with the queen removed from the 8th rank, there's no danger to the black king. There's no king f7, queen g8, so white has to attend to the rook. Doesn't have time to do so, so this is a win for black, and Adhiban resigned. So second win in a row, win in a row for Mamedyarov. So this man is hot. A man's not hot. Yes, he's hot. Big Shakh. Book it. Let's move on and get ready for the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.